Over the past 6 months, I've spent my fair share of time sitting in airports all over the United States, traveling between different video game events, and I've overheard too many conversations to mention. Most of these were completely inconsequential, centered on small talk, family, or the next flight that they were rushing to make, but one conversation in particular really stuck in my mind. It happened while I was sitting in North Carolina during a short layover, and it was between an elderly couple centered on violent video games and how they were warping the minds of their grandkids. Now, part of me really wanted to jump in, speak to this couple that was considerably older than me as to the truth behind video games and how they relate to violent crime, but after spending an all-nighter getting to that airport, I was in no condition and was lacking in enough patience to help. Unfortunately, we live in a society that is struggling to answer the question of mass shootings with whatever it can find, and the easy target is video games. The latest solution to combat school violence has been brought forth by the Pennsylvania House of Representatives in the form of a bill that proposes a 10% excise tax on violent video games. This SEN tax would be added to all games sold at retail that are rated ESRB, M for mature, or for adults only, even though I've never personally seen this rating. The creator of the bill explains that violent video games might be an element in the rise of school shootings in America, and continues on with, one factor that may be contributing to the rise in and intensity of school violence is the materials kids see and act out in video games. The author of the bill cited the 2017 National Center for Health Research's statement that studies demonstrate a link between violent video games and increases in aggressive thoughts and behaviors. Now, I will include a link to the full article that the Pennsylvania elected official cites in support of his bill in the video description, and although it doesn't seem to project any false information, the article states several times that there is no clear evidence to support that assumption, and it is not clear when it came to the subject of if it was definitive whether violent video game exposure was linked to criminality or delinquency. Conveniently, the official left out the fact that the article also explains that other factors like mental illness, access to weapons, and adverse environments should be considered as other risk factors. The Entertainment Software Association, a lobby organization for the video game industry, has already put out a statement that this bill is in violation of the U.S. Constitution. Their statement reads, "Numerous authorities, including scientists, medical professionals, government agencies, and the U.S. Supreme Court, found that video games do not cause violence." I took the time to dig a bit deeper into this last portion of their statement. I researched the cases related to video games that the U.S. Supreme Court has received, and the one I did find was Brown v. Entertainment Merchants Association from 2011. This landmark case by the U.S. Supreme Court struck down a 2005 California state law banning the sale of certain violent video games to children without parental supervision. In a 7-2 decision, the court upheld the lower court decisions and nullified the law, ruling that video games were protected speech under the First Amendment as other forms of media. In my opinion, where the Pennsylvania representative failed was in his target and proposed implementation of restrictions through the tariff. If your ultimate goal is to make schools and public places safer from the possibility of a mass shooting, then placing a 10% SEN tax on the sale of video games deemed as violent is a weak and completely off-centered attempt at placing a band-aid on a very real concern. He could have chosen any other avenue, such as mental health, access to weapons and ammunition, or stricter background checks and restrictions, but instead decided to focus his gaze onto violent video games, as if they were the cause of all of this needless violence. Listen, I consider myself a moderate when it comes to government. I believe in free speech, the free press, and the right to bear arms, but within these freedoms, my more moderate side believes there should be sensible regulations. According to this latest statistic, the Washington Post reports that there are now more than 393 million guns in the United States. That's enough for every man, woman, and child to own one and still have a whopping 67 million guns left over. That puts us in an estimated 120.5 guns per every 100 residents, and at a gun ownership rate double that of the next highest country in the world, Yemen, with just 52.8 guns per 100 residents. Looking deeper into the representative's proposal, and I can see why he went after video games versus some of the other issues surrounding mass shootings. Short answer, they're an easy target. It is much easier to place the tax onto video games and tout them as the cause for the rise in violent crime than to tackle the real issues that are truly at the heart of this epidemic. Putting tighter restrictions on access to weaponry, weapon modifications, and ammunition would draw the full ire of the NRA lobby as unconstitutional. Placing candidates for gun ownership through much tougher and thorough background checks would require more government funding and would once again come under the gaze of the NRA. Restricting ownership and/or denying access to ownership for candidates with known mental health issues or a history of issues requires either a current mental health screening or time to review over the candidate's past history, and this would anger the potential buyers, once again bringing about legal battles over the Second Amendment. All of the points I have just listed would require significantly more time and effort to make it through the Pennsylvania House of Representatives. There would be legal challenges, appeals, conference committees, and testimony for both sides of the argument, ultimately leading to years of battling, along with untold amounts of taxpayer money spent. However, this is the reason that citizens are elected and sent to represent us, to fight those hard fights, to take on big money interest and protect each and every citizen from outside dangers. Instead, the representative chose the much easier target to go after: video games, even without definitive proof that they are the source of this sharp rise in violent crime. I've played violent video games since my youth and have zero issues dividing reality from fantasy. I, like most of you, can tell what I see and experience in a game does not translate into real-life actions. Perhaps if the representative is truly concerned about preventing these shootings, he should be targeting the real sources of conflict: a society oversaturated with guns, serious mental health issues that are allowed to go unchecked, and lobbying organizations that care about dollars over safety. Ultimately, there is a storm raging that everyone can see, but we can't seem to get under control. When we can all come to the table, sit down like grown-ups without all of the lobbying interest at play, and have the discussion that needs to be had, only then can we truly prevent this from happening in the future. Tighter and sensible gun control is needed. Stronger expectations and frequent conversations between parents and children are needed. Sales on firearms and ammunition to a person with known or possible mental health issues should be prohibited. Loss of a single life to senseless and preventable violence is not acceptable, and government officials should not be afraid to go directly after the root concerns related to mass shootings instead of targeting an outlier like video games.